Assalamu alaikum ji, and thank you so much for attending our session. My name is Izza Farrukh. I'm a senior education specialist with the World Bank. I'm joined by Abbas Rashid Saab, who is the executive director of the Society for Advancement of Higher Education, and Dr. Jessica Albrecht, who is an associate professor at LUMS, and before that has worked across the world working on health and education reform. The topic for today's session is on learning poverty. And this is part of our recommendations on learning poverty are part of a nationwide campaign that the World Bank initiated starting July 2023 with the help of PIDE. I see Nadeem Saab at the back. And we developed a series of policy notes. The first two focused on human development, stunting, and learning. There was a policy note on unleashing the agri-food sector, on sustainable energy, on transforming the private sector, two on increasing government revenues and making expenditures more efficient. And thirdly, we had one on making public sector institutions more effective. But the core two policy notes were on human development. And here we will discuss learning poverty, but obviously we'll touch upon the other implications for other sectors too. Could I please ask you to go to the first slide? Belly slide, yeah. If there's a clicker, then I can just use the clicker. ठीक है जी, उसके बाद अगली slide कर लें, please. So I'll just stand over here if that's okay. So what is learning poverty? Learning poverty is defined as the inability of a child to be able to read and understand an age-appropriate text. And here we look at children who are towards the end of their primary age, primary school, and we're looking at 10 years old. So as per the World Bank's latest research, 4 out of 5 10-year-olds in Pakistan today are unable to read basic text with understanding, 78%. That's a very high number. A learning poverty is a composite indicator. It consists of schooling deprivation, that is children who have not been able to go to school. And at this point in time, numbers vary based on calculations, but about 20.3 million children in Pakistan do not have access to education. The other indicator is learning deprivation, that is children who are going to school but are still not learning how to read at the appropriate age level. And that is at 70%. So of the roughly 43 million children who are going to school, 70% are unable to read with understanding. We have two other figures for Pakistan which are equally startling. One is learning adjusted years of schooling. So in Pakistan today, when a child graduates from the 10th grade, they have actually only acquired 5.1 years of schooling. For girls, it's 4.8. For boys, it's 5.4. And finally, we have something called the Human Capital Index. What is the Human Capital Index? It is the percentage of us being able to achieve our human capital. And for Pakistan, again, 0.41. That means your average person in Pakistan today is only achieving 41% of their human capital. It varies by province. For Balochistan, the figure is 32%. That means a child born in Balochistan today will only achieve 32% of the human capital. And that is equivalent to the Human Capital Index for Niger, which is one of the lowest performing economies of Africa. And it is also lower than your average for low middle income countries across the world. So, and there's another figure, last figure, is human capital utilization. That is when you take human capital and you adjust it for labor force participation. For men in Pakistan, that is 31%, and for girls, it is 8%. That means that only girls in Pakistan today are only able to achieve 8% of the human capital potential. If you could go to the next slide, please. So, we've been studying these trends, and we've been debating on what we can do to begin with to address the learning poverty crisis, which forms the core of the human capital crisis. And as I said earlier, we had consultations across Pakistan with thousands of people on what it would take to address the learning poverty crisis. I said I was going to give you the last figure, but I'm just going to throw another number in there. 40% of Pakistan's children today are stunted. So when you talk about these recommendations, we have to remember that even when children come to school, their ability to learn is diminished by the fact that they are stunted. And again, stunting levels are higher for girls, stunting levels are higher for rural children, and these are children who are already learning deprived. So our first set of priorities focuses on immediate priorities that, whether the political party that's coming into power in February should take into consideration, us as civil society, us as development practitioners, us as citizens of Pakistan should take into account. So obviously the first is bring every child into school with a focus on girls. When I said that 20 million children in Pakistan are out of school, 12 million of those are girls. So again, a disproportionate amount of children out of school are girls. Pakistan has had some really good experiences with public-private partnerships. Punjab in particular, almost 3 million children have access to school through public-private partnerships fostered by the Punjab Education Foundation. Conditional crash transfers across Pakistan, especially for girls, to encourage them to attend regularly and stay in middle school. Enrollment campaigns globally have proved successful, and in Pakistan as well. And finally, considering innovative approaches. When children come to school, it is very important to focus on teaching them how to read. Reading is the fundamental building block for all later learning. So one of our core recommendations is make sure they get enough time learning how to read. A daily lesson in the academic calendar, taught using the right kind of resources, teachers who are able to teach well, and then assessments to make sure that children are improving their reading proficiency. One of the challenges that we face in delivering quality education in Pakistan is multi-grading. We have seen that over 50% of schools, for instance, in Pakistan at the primary level are multi-grading. And while nobody wants that, that is a reality that we have to live with until we can improve the supply of schools and teachers in those schools. So we have to accept that reality and equip our teachers to teach to a multi-grade setting. And there are models that have worked across the world. One is called teaching at the right level, where you distribute children by their reading ability, learning ability, rather than by their age. We've experimented with that in Sindh, in Punjab, in KP, and the results are promising. Finally, invest in collecting and using data by setting performance targets. And that has again been done well to some extent in all 4 provinces, starting with Punjab when it set up the monitoring and evaluation regime in the early 2000s. Thank you. So these were immediate priorities. We have some long-term priorities as well. The first is just making sure that we invest enough in our teachers. Teacher recruitment, teacher subject matter, teacher pedagogy, and then making sure that teachers are equipped to teach their children, their students in a language that they understand, and we'll unpack that a little later. And then, don't set up our teachers for failure through enormous teacher-student ratios. We have a very small number of teachers, but if they're distributed equitably, at least our students will have a better chance of teachers being able to teach them a little more effectively. Early childhood education. We know that the first 5 years of a child's life are the most essential for them. Our brain is like a sponge. It grows at a level it will never grow at again. So just making sure that children get an opportunity to learn through parental awareness campaigns, through early childhood education opportunities, but early childhood education opportunities that meet minimum quality standards. It's not just about getting our kids into school, but making sure that these young kids are provided the right kind of stimulus they need for a strong foundation. And then, this we'll unpack a little later, teaching children in a language that they understand. Evidence from within Pakistan, from across the globe, shows that when children learn in their first language, they learn better. And that is especially important for Pakistan, where the current language of instruction, whether it's Urdu or English, is alien to most of our children. And finally, what is needed for all this is to amplify the education budget and to make sure that it is being spent effectively. There's a lot of debate on that, but Pakistan is probably, yeah, it actually spends lower than most low-income countries across the globe when it comes to education. We just spend about 2.4%. अगर आप अगली slide पे चले जाएं. And here you go, 2.4%. We spend just more than Bangladesh. We spend less than your average for low-income countries, and we spend less than most of our South Asian neighbors. And what is needed for this? Political consensus, of course, interventions that respond to local conditions, gradual increase in the education budget, and investments based on evidence of what works. There is so much research on what has worked across the globe in countries with similar contexts to Pakistan, and we need to really dig into that evidence. There's reports that are published almost every year, and we do, right? We experiment. There's a small innovation in one province, there's a small innovation in another province, but when you think of using those experiences, those pilots for scale up, and that is where reform sometimes fails to sustain, is when you think of scaling up. So this was my very brief presentation. Like I said, I'm joined here with Abbas with Jessica. And Abbas and Jessica, I'm going to ask you to join a conversation on so we had a series of recommendations here, and I think one recommendation that gets a lot of heated debate is teaching children in a language that they understand. When we put that up as a recommendation, there's a lot of pushback saying that you're depriving children of the ability to learn English well, mainstream themselves in the formal sector, look for jobs internationally. So you're doing our children a disservice while you send your children to private schools, elite private schools where they learn English well, but your recommendation for public school children is that they should learn in their mother tongue. And that is reinforcing the demographic divide. So Abbas, I'm going to turn to you about that and any other recommendations that you'd like to unpack. And Jessica, if you have anything to say on this and on any of the other recommendations.
Ji, thank you, Izza, for that excellent presentation. लैंग्वेज के हवाले से जो आपने बात की वो बिल्कुल सही बात है कि आई एम श्योर यू गेट पुश बैक ऑन दैट क्योंकि वो एक मंतकी बात लगती है कि देखें बच्चों को हमने अंग्रेज़ी सिखानी है और यही एक तरीका है कि they will then be ready for higher education, they'll be ready for jobs, they will have mobility, and you will find that a very large section of parents, quite understandably, will therefore push for a great emphasis on English right from the word go, वो चाहते हैं कि right from grade 1, maybe even prep, या early childhood care and education की जो स्टेज है उससे ही आप अंग्रेज़ी में शुरू कर दें विद द assumption कि देखें आप बहुत जल्दी शुरू करेंगे तो then they will learn. That is not how language works. So let me just make this absolutely clear that I would also support the notion कि पाकिस्तान में भी पाकिस्तान से बाहर भी अंग्रेज़ी सीखना बेहद ज़रूरी है, इसमें कोई शक व शुबा नहीं है और शायद पाकिस्तान में ज़्यादा ज़रूरी हो बिकॉज़ हमने तो उसको हर चीज़ का मेयार बना दिया है. सो आई वुड हार्डली आर्ग्यू कि नहीं इसको छोड़ें आप कुछ और करें. तो इसमें बिल्कुल वो मेरी राय बिल्कुल यानी मैं उनसे मुत्तफ़िक हूँ. द प्रॉब्लम अराइजेज़ वेयर यू आर लुकिंग एट हाउ दिस इज़ गोइंग टू हैपन. यहाँ पे हमारे मुल्क में 2-4% वो बच्चे हैं जो ऐसे घरों में हैं परवरिश पाते हैं जहाँ पे दे लिव इन एन इंग्लिश लैंग्वेज यूनिवर्स. उनके लिए अंग्रेज़ी सीखना कोई मसला नहीं है. वो कभी स्कूल सारी उम्र न भी जाएं अंग्रेज़ी उनको आ जाएगी और कुछ आए ना आए. तो दैट इज़ नॉट द प्रॉब्लम फॉर देम. लेकिन जो बाकी लोग हैं जिनकी एनवायरनमेंट अंग्रेज़ी को सपोर्ट नहीं करती, भक्कर के एक गांव से एक बच्चा स्कूल पहुंचता है और टीचर की अगर ये कोशिश है कि उसको डे वन से उन्होंने अंग्रेज़ी में पढ़ाना है, जो उसके सामने मटेरियल आप रखते हैं वो भी अंग्रेज़ी में है, सब यानी जिस हद तक भी वो टीचर की अपनी अंग्रेज़ी ऐसी है कि वो पढ़ा सकता है, द पॉइंट इज़ कि बच्चे के लिए दैट इज़ जस्ट नॉट गोइंग टू वर्क। उसमें अब एक और आप डायमेंशन देखें कि बच्चा जब घर से स्कूल पहुंचता है, they come with a very valuable asset, and the asset is that of vocabulary. कि by various estimates, depending on the environment he or she is coming from, they carry with them a reservoir of 2,000 to 5,000 words in the language that is spoken at home by the parents, by the household, by the, mohalla, जो भी है. जब आप उस पर बिल्ड नहीं करते तो you actually let go of a very major asset. और उसमें एक चीज़ जो जहन में रखने वाली है, एक प्रोफेसर हैं जो लिंग्विस्टिक्स के एक्सपर्ट हैं, कमिंस, उनका ये कहना है कि देयर इज़ सच अ थिंग एज, यानी ये एक देयर इज़ अ सेट ऑफ ट्रांसफरेबल स्किल्स कि जो स्किल्स बच्चा एक ज़बान में एक्वायर करता है वो ट्रांसफ़र होती हैं इन लर्निंग another language. So develop the language that they are coming with, that they are starting with. उससे कुछ CUP है मेरा ख्याल है, कॉमन यूनिफॉर्म प्रोफिशेंसी और वट एवर. इवन चॉम्स्की भी बात करते हैं, वन ऑफ द ग्रेटेस्ट स्कॉलर्स ऑफ लैंग्वेज इन मॉडर्न टाइम्स, ऑफ समथिंग लाइक अ यूनिवर्सल ग्रामर. सो अगेन वही वाली बात है कि आप बच्चे को एक ज़बान में जो वो लेके चलता है उसको डेवलप करें, ये ना समझें कि दैट इज़, यानी अगर आप पंजाबी या पश्तो या सराइकी की बात कर रहे हैं या बलोची, the time and effort you are giving to that, to getting the child to learn that language better, is not time being subtracted from English or French or Chinese. That will go on to strengthen, यानी एक टर्म इस्तेमाल होती है in this area of scaffolding. So you're scaffolding the learning of the second language with the first, जो उसकी knowledge है, जो उसकी रवानी है, जो उसकी ability है to think in a certain language, to formulate ideas with some logic and be able to express himself or herself in a given language will go on to. हमारा प्रॉब्लम ये है कि हम इस बात से घबराते हैं या somehow हमारी एक assumption होती है कि जो, यानी we don't think in terms of phases in a child's schooling, कि भाई एक इब्तदा है, एक प्राइमरी लेवल है, उसमें आप वो ज़बान लें जो बच्चा जिसको समझता है. जैसा आपने कहा, I don't think it can be more simply or better formulated. Please teach the child in a language that he or she understands. Yani, let us think for a minute of the obverse. Do you want to teach the child in a language that he or she doesn't understand? I mean, really. So, यानी आप बच्चे को ये करते हैं कि आप उसको अगर हिसाब सिखा रहे हैं, जनरल नॉलेज सिखा रहे हैं, कुछ भी सिखा रहे हैं, you're really asking them to learn two things at the same time. That particular subject, जिसमें जो उनको सिखाना है, और एक नई ज़बान. That just doesn't work, and all we have to do is to look at the last 10 years of the results that we are getting in our schools. तो वो हमें हकीकत बिल्कुल आया हो जाती है. So the thing is कि that is the first phase. Then there is Urdu, जिसमें आपको material ज़्यादा मिलेगा as they go on to middle school and so on. Then there is English, जिसके बगैर गुजारा नहीं है. And you continue with these three languages simultaneously. सिर्फ बात ये है कि आपने एक जो effort उस पे लगाना है, जो time लगाना है, that differs. So in the beginning, you're giving 80% of the time, let's say, to the local language. It then moves on as you go on to middle school to a greater emphasis on Urdu, and then to a greater emphasis on English. So there is the, जिसे कहते हैं, basic interpersonal skills, that language that you acquire, which takes, by various estimates, 6 months to 2 years. And then there is the academic language that you acquire that takes close to 7 to 8 years by different estimates. So let's say by the end of middle school, you switch to English as a medium of instruction. अगर आप medium of instruction उस ज़बान को बनाएंगे, before children, before the students have learned that language, obviously they will not be able to learn that subject क्योंकि उनको वो ज़बान ही नहीं आई जिसमें आप मुख्तलिफ मज़ामीन उनको सिखा रहे हैं. So they learn neither the language nor the subjects. But I think I should stop here and just...
Yeah, I agree with what Abbas Sab has said. My background is, I've been working here for about a year as a professor in the School of Education at LUMS. But prior to that, I had a 20-year career in international schools around the world. And so I would say that it isn't even an issue of whether or not our teachers are well trained or effective, because of these issues that Abbas, these underlying fundamental issues in the disparity in the way that children actually learn language. And I say this because I've worked in very, very high-cost international schools in many different settings. And when we do not attune to the mother language, the children always do poorly. So I'm going to tell a story, I guess, in a way to back up this discussion. A school that I worked at was in Iraq, in Kurdistan. And this school was funded by a very wonderful philanthropist who had this concept and this idea of children from Iraq, from Kurdistan, who would get an opportunity for a world-class education, and they would be musicians and linguists. It was a beautiful vision that this man had. And unfortunately, he passed away a bit too soon to actually see his vision put in place. And so the people that came behind him, they understood his vision, but they implemented it in ways that didn't align with the research, the work that we know about education. So we had students from Kurdistan who spoke a certain dialect of Kurdish at home. And then they came to school and they were taught in two completely foreign languages, Turkish and English. The assumption was, if you just throw children into a language, they'll pick it up. This is not actually how children learn, especially when it comes to academia. Consider yourself, especially if you are a multilingual speaker, and if you've got one language that is stronger than another, and you're in a setting, and something is difficult, you've got a problem that you've got to solve. What language do you use in your head to solve that problem? You use the language you know the best. So if that language that you have from home, those 4,000, 5,000 words aren't capitalized on, when children come to school, they cannot formulate and problem solve. You have to then default to rote learning, because all you can do is memorize. You don't have the language from your home language where you're strongest, you don't have the academic language to problem solve, and you don't yet understand the English or the second language that you're learning in the classroom well enough to problem solve in your head. So that complex conceptual learning that we keep talking about as being essential to progress any country cannot happen. And this was what was happening with our students in this particular school. So they were learning two foreign languages, completely foreign to them. Then once they got to first grade, they started to pick up Kurdish, but it was a different dialect of Kurdish. It wasn't the dialect that they knew. And then in fourth grade, they picked up Arabic. So by fifth grade, they're speaking 4 languages, all of them poorly, plus their dialect at home, which their parents, whose lives were completely interrupted by war, every single one of the students that I taught, their parents were refugees at one time, right? So they themselves had interrupted education. So their parents at home are not yet able to teach them the basics in numeracy and literacy in their home language. So therefore, they're speaking 4 or 5 languages, and none of them fluently. And then we expect them to be able to read. And this was an IB school with very intense conceptual learning, and it was completely unfair to those students. And that's essentially what we're asking students to do here. We are asking students to think and to problem solve in a language that's not their own, without language models around. And there's no way that they can do that deep learning and problem solving. They will default, and everyone in the system will default to rote learning when you take this approach to teaching language. And so I can tell that through storytelling, and we also see it through the numbers here as well. We can see that happening right now. So even as somebody who does not speak Urdu, mujhe maaf kar de, that's about what I have. I just speak thoda. I 100% agree with this. My own experience and the research has definitely backed this up. Please don't fall for TikTok, Instagram things of throw a kid into a language and they're just going to pick it up like magic. That's not actually how it works.
Thank you so much, Abbas and Jessica. I think really strong argument. And rote learning is something that we've seen. It's a pandemic, if I may call it, in the low-fee private schools and in the public schools in Pakistan. So, Jessica, you worked with data, you worked with evidence, and one of our core recommendations that comes to any set of reforms is base your reforms, policy, practice, implementation on evidence of what works. And in Pakistan today, all 4 provinces actually now have strong data regimes. We are collecting data on school level inputs, teacher attendance, student attendance, school facilities, on learning outcomes. You've worked in many parts of the world. What is your take on how data can be used more effectively? And then I'll also ask Abbas Saab, because Abbas Saab has done a tremendous amount of research on what happens in school. He's done it, he's jointly edited a book on education, crisis and reform perspectives from South Asia. You've done the What Works and Why study. And Jessica was part of a conversation on data at the Pakistan Institute for Education last week. So it would be really great to get your perspective on how we can use data better to inform the recommendations that we've put out and other improvements in education delivery as well.
Yeah, I think Pakistan is making huge steps forward with data collection and data organization, data standardization. And this is important. But data collection, data standardization, even data analysis are completely separate from data use. And so we'll always go back to the research and what the research says. The ability to use data is extremely complex to make decisions. People are always say, I hear this, I don't know if you have, I'm certain you have, the numbers don't lie, but the numbers can lie. It depends on who's collecting it, what questions they're asking, when they collect it, how it's analyzed. All of these things go into the process of data use, okay? So, for example, let's think of TIMSS. How many of you have heard about the results of Pakistan in the TIMSS assessment? It's the international math. It's a mathematics and science study, yes. And it's administered, it's an external body that administers it. And the results were abysmal for Pakistan, and people ignored it. It wasn't contextually appropriate, they didn't like the way it was implemented, and so forth. This goes to the idea that
Jessica, sorry, just to let you know how abysmal they were, we came 57 out of 58 countries who were tested. So
yeah, 57 out of 58 countries who took the test. So it was very poor. But people didn't even want to act on those results, okay? So that's data, right? But people didn't want to act on those results for a number of reasons. And one of them is that they didn't trust the results. So were they really accurate? Did they really correctly capture the learning of our students? Another aspect was it's so bad we don't even know what to do with it, right? So this is just one small example of we can get all the data we want, but until we know what to do with it, we're always going to be stagnant. Collecting the data is much easier than taking action on it.
And Jessica, you know of other countries that did act on their data, this
Yes.
data, or on PISA.
Yes.
Can you speak a little about that as well? Just bring that perspective in, that would be really helpful.
Sure, yeah. So if we think about the PISA assessments by, have we heard of PISA? Yes, another large-scale assessment that's with an international body. And there are several countries that really capitalized on that data. One of the countries most recently that did this was Brazil. Brazil had very, very poor results, and the public were outraged by the results. The public, the press were really outraged and upset. And there was a lot of push from media and from the average person on the street to change these results. They could not accept that their education system was failing. And I think due to a variety of political pressures, but including this pressure from the bottom, someone was appointed who really held the trust of the people. And he knew what to do. And he instituted a comprehensive reform for Brazil. And the next time they took the PISA exams, they moved up significantly in every area. Okay? And so when people are able to use the data to institute systematic reforms, not just one-off reforms here, or as we've talked about, an intervention that you put in one province, but then you don't scale up. Instead of thinking in this way, when we use the data to make informed decisions, we can move the needle. But this takes a whole host of organizational, or in this case, systematic needs. Okay? So you have to have data that's trusted. You have to have data that's timely. One of the major issues here is that data takes so long to gather, to analyze, to get access to. To get access to large-scale data is very, very difficult here. The average person doesn't have access to it. They don't even know what's there. So how can your average journalist, for example, do a report on these results? So because data is so remote from people and the average person, nobody can really advocate for that change. Nobody can push for the change except for those people who are collecting the data anyway. And then the data becomes what they want it to be. So when I work with data, I always think about, what is this going to do for the classroom? We talk a lot about policy level data, but we really ignore the classroom level data. And when I started doing my work on data here, I was told by somebody in the government, nobody's doing data, nobody's using it. Why are you even bothering looking into this? And being a teacher for 20 years, I know that that's absolutely untrue. A teacher every day is using data to make decisions. They're observing their students in class, seeing their reactions, looking at their homework, checking their copybooks. All of this is data that teachers are using every single day. The thing, though, about effective data use is it has to be flexible and agile. You have to be able to use it. So the teachers who are using data every single day, think of the curriculum. The curriculum is packed. It's intense. It's difficult. There are vacation days all the time because of climate factors, right? They've got to get through this curriculum. If they are looking at the data and they're saying, oh, these children are not getting my lesson on addition, what are they going to do? They're going to keep going forward. They have no choice. If we're going to use data-informed decisions, we have to be able to see a problem and address it. But the way that curriculum and schooling is arranged here is control is so tight, there's no room for flexibility to improve anything. And this goes from the bottom all the way to the top. When it takes so long for the data to reach the top, the data's 2-3 years old. And those children have moved on and are still not learning to read. And then the data comes back with reforms and new policies and practices, and those children are gone. So the data you've based it on, it's changed. So there is a whole host of systematic needs in order to use data effectively, and we have to attune to the data use now that we've got the data collection established.
Thank you so much, Jessica. Very rich. Abbas.
Just in support of what Jessica said just now, देखिए इसमें कुछ 2-4 यानी जो broader चीज़ें ज़हन में रखने वाली हैं, वो एक तो ये है the quality of the data. हमें उस पे could have reservations, whatever. But ये उसके अलावा ये बात कि अगर मसलन मैं आपको एक मिसाल देता हूँ कि यहाँ पे जो असेसमेंट के हवाले से there is an organization, an institution called the Punjab Examination Commission, PEC. वो जनरेट करते हैं बहुत सा डेटा। पहले वो सबका इम्तिहान लेते थे हर साल जो बच्चे 5वीं 8वीं में हैं, अब वो सब नहीं होता, वो सैम्पल बेस्ड होता है, फिर भी बहुत सा डेटा है। अब मसला ये है कि यानी जिस शख्स को सबसे ज़्यादा वो उसकी ज़रूरत है वो तो टीचर है। अब वो टीचर तक पहुँचेगा नहीं पहुँचेगा, कब पहुँचेगा, यू से दैट कोहॉर्ट इज़ मूव्ड ऑन। सो वहाँ पे हमें जानना ज़रूरी है कि भाई अगर कोई हमने असेसमेंट की है, कोई टेस्ट दिया है, ब्रॉडली what are the areas children are weak, and that data needs to be then shared with other institutions that are relevant, like कायद for instance, the teacher training institution, कि भाई आपके जो ट्रेनिंग प्रोग्राम्स हैं उसमें हमें पता ये लग रहा है कि भाई बच्चों को फ्रैक्शन नहीं आ रहे, रेशो प्रोपोर्शन नहीं आ रहा, फलानी चीज़ नहीं आ रही, इस पे ज़्यादा ध्यान दें, बाकी दे आर डूइंग रीजनेबली वेल, या अंग्रेज़ी में फलानी चीज़ नहीं आ रही, या जो करिकुलम डेवलपमेंट जिसका काम है वो होना चाहिए नहीं होना चाहिए वो और बहस है, बट द पॉइंट इज़ दिस इज़ द करिकुलम। उसमें आप जो किताबें बना रहे हैं उसमें ये चीज़ें, इस पे आपका एम्फोसिस है, मे बी यू नीड टू शिफ्ट योर एम्फोसिस एंड सो ऑन। सो देयर इज़ अ होल रेजीम ऑफ डेटा शेयरिंग दैट शुड बी इन प्लेस, ताकि जिसको जो करना है वो अपनी टिंकरिंग कर ले अपने लेवल पे कि जो उसका कंपोनेंट है। बट दैट टेक्स अस टू अनदर इशू विच इज़ कि कुछ मामलात ऐसे हैं जो कि स्पेसिफिकली एजुकेशन के नहीं हैं, बट दे इम्पिंज ऑन एजुकेशन। मसलन the very fact that the secretary of education may change after 3 months or 6 months, भाई वो he is the team leader in the province, अब और भी secretaries change हो रहे हैं, so it's not an education specific issue, but it has obviously a major effect on education simply because भाई वो एक तालीम as we all know काफ़ी एक पेचीदा मामला है। अच्छा, अब आप किसी को वहाँ पे लेके आते हैं और उसको 6 महीने बाद ट्रांसफ़र कर देते हैं, तो फिर मतलब ये है कि उसको कितना वो समझ पाएगा उस निज़ाम को, कितना कुछ मतलब है कि वो उसमें जो रिफॉर्म्स हैं, जो चेंजेस लाने हैं, उसका इदराक उसे होगा। सो दैट बिकम्स एन इशू। इसी तरह जो अब टीचर ट्रेनिंग वाली बात है, अब उसमें हम मसलन ये कहते हैं कि जिस तरह अभी बात हुई या शायद नहीं हुई, but just to touch briefly on the language issue again, कि आप टीचर को मसलन ये नहीं बता रहे कि भाई जो उसकी एक मादरी ज़बान है या पहली ज़बान है जो जिसमें वो बच्चा कंफर्टेबल है, whatever they understand, how do you build on that? जहाँ तक उर्दू की बात है, बहुत से बच्चे ऑब्वियसली ऐसे हैं, एक अक्सरियत ऐसी होगी जिनकी मादरी ज़बान उर्दू नहीं है। सो देन हाउ डू यू टीच देम उर्दू एज अ सेकेंड लैंग्वेज? बहुत से बच्चे ऐसे हैं जिनको हम तकरीबन सभी को अंग्रेज़ी सिखाना चाहते हैं। हाउ डू यू टीच इंग्लिश एज अ फॉरेन लैंग्वेज? सो अगर टीचर ट्रेनिंग में उन इदारों में ये चेंजेस आप नहीं लाएंगे, सो असेसमेंट की बात हुई, टीचर ट्रेनिंग की बात हुई, सो देयर आर एनी नंबर ऑफ दीज major issues जो कि impinge upon school effectiveness, upon the quality of education. देखिए, 2-3 चीज़ें बहुत बुनियादी हैं। Let me just talk very briefly about school effectiveness, कि एक तो physical environment है, अगर schools are falling apart, वो सारा कुछ है। दूसरा, टीचर काफ़ी नहीं हैं, वो एक अपनी जगह मसला है। लेकिन उसके अलावा भी 2 बहुत बुनियादी चीज़ें, एक तो ये है कि अनलेस यू गेट द लैंग्वेज पॉलिसी राइट, बड़ी बुनियादी चीज़ है, अगर आप वो वाला मसला टैकल नहीं करते, बिकॉज लैंग्वेज इज़ द लेंस थ्रू विच यू लर्न डिफरेंट सब्जेक्ट्स, इफ़ यू गेट दैट रॉन्ग यू प्रीटी मच गोइंग टू गेट एवरीथिंग एल्स रॉन्ग एज वेल। दूसरी बात जो आपने जिसका जिक्र किया, विच इज़ फंडामेंटल अगेन, and that has to do with stunting, with malnutrition. अगर बच्चे को आपने वही बुनियादी सपोर्ट नहीं दी जो आप बात कर रही थी, द फर्स्ट 1000 days, तो उसके बाद और फिर वी गेट इंस्टेंसेस कि बच्चा घर से आया है बगैर नाश्ता किए हुए, वट एवर, आपने क्या उनको तालीम देनी है? यानी व्हाट काइंड ऑफ क्वालिटी आर वी टॉकिंग अबाउट इन द एब्सेंस ऑफ गेटिंग योर लैंग्वेज पॉलिसी राइट, इन टर्म्स ऑफ गेटिंग दिस न्यूट्रिशनल? देखिए, गवर्नमेंट के फिगर्स हैं 40%. नाउ थिंक ऑफ व्हाट दैट मीन्स. It means almost every other child is suffering from either stunting or malnutrition or something of that kind. और उसमें फिर आप कह रहे हैं कि जी देखें, क्वालिटी एजुकेशन जो है वो तो हमारा बड़े सीरियस है हम इसके बारे में. So I think those are some of the things that we need to tackle. यानी why can't, for instance, we have a school meals program जिसमें बहुत ही बुनियादी किस्म का वो ज़रा मॉडेस्ट वो रखें. न्यूट्रिशनल बिस्किट्स की बात यहाँ होती रही है. बिस्प आई थिंक इवन नाउ डिस्ट्रीब्यूट सम काइंड ऑफ क्या उसे कहते हैं वो, दे हैव समथिंग सॉर्ट न्यूट्रिशनल दैट वो अपने जो उनका वसीला तालीम प्रोग्राम है उसके साथ वो डिस्ट्रीब्यूट करते हैं टू चिल्ड्रन एंड सो ऑन. सो माई पॉइंट इज़ कि yes, it will still cost, it will be a substantial cost, but I think that is a cost we have to bear, because it will end up being a huge cost of the kind that, maybe 10 years down the road that we will realize we cannot bear in terms of what it means. अब ये जो आपकी फिगर है, ये जो 5 years की, आप अंदाज़ा करें एडजस्टेड उसमें लर्निंग में, अंदाज़ा करें आप 5.4 की बात कर रहे हैं, विच मीन्स कि एक बंदा मैट्रिक कर रहा है, आप ये कह रहे हैं कि एक्चुअली दे आर एट द लेवल ऑफ just having completed primary. Imagine the kind of loss nationally that the country is incurring every year. But I'll stop here.
Before I open up to questions, just wanted to emphasize two things. One is that Sab spoke about learning adjusted years of schooling. Parents are taking up huge opportunity costs to send their boys and girls to school. Actual costs in terms of transportation, in terms of uniforms, other resources needed. And they're putting their faith in the system. I went to a school in Thatta a couple of months ago. In November, climate change, super hot. And these little girls were walking to school for maybe half an hour. I asked them, they were so small, and again, probably products of stunting. And the schools were in such a bad condition that they couldn't sit inside. They had to sit in the veranda outside because the roof was peeling, or it was too dark in the classrooms. So we did a few household surveys recently, and parents want their children to go to school. It was one of their topmost priorities, the health and education for their children, especially for girls. And they've come to this realization that an educated woman has lower infant mortality rates, has better chances of having educated children. So this information is out there, and parents know it, and we're doing them all a disservice. So we'll open up for question and answers, and sir, I'll start with you, and then I'll 1, 2, and 3.
One of the things that popped up in mind, particularly to draw your attention on the schooling, is quite a few years ago when Shafqat Mahmood was the minister. So we were called, all of us in the field of, in the realm of education, higher education. So that was the problem that was brought into focus. That you are trying to be a bit more stern on English medium schools, and so our children are going to those schools. So what will be the fate of them if you are going to put a squeeze on those schools instead of raising the standard of Urdu medium schools and public sector institutions and so on and so forth? So one response that Shafqat Mahmood came up with was really very pertinent. He said, well, the two students going to a different school, they cannot even communicate with each other. Madrasa students haven't been discussed at all. I was expecting Abbas Sahib to just throw a bit of a focus on that. HSN, for instance, that's another extreme. So how to bridge that hiatus, which is so frighteningly widened over the years. And second is just being at BNU, I came up with the opinion, and I discussed it with Tariq Rahman Sahab, who probably would be in the audience, that we have lost touch with the classics. For instance, our forefathers used to learn Quran, then Persian, then from Persian onwards they used to go to learn English. And Iqbal, for instance, was fluent in 4 or 5 languages. You know, Zafar Ali Khan was fluent in 6 languages. And they had been doing well in all those languages, you know, writing poetry and journalism and so on and so forth. So probably we have lost touch with the classics. Pakistan is the only country whose education system has no classic foundations on the classics at all. You know, so that's a big deficiency or inadequacy that we need to draw our attention to. So I'm just trying to invite your opinion on that for my own learning. Thank you.
देखिए उसमें वो आपकी बात, the point is very well taken, and I think that's a serious absence, ये जो classics की आपने बात की. पर देखिए ये और ये view कई लोग express करते हैं. So I'll keep this short because I think we need to take some more questions. देखिए, this is a somewhat, I'm sure शफ़क़त साहब meant very well, but equity इस तरह achieve नहीं होती. देखिए, so ये चाहे वो single national curriculum की बात हो, चाहे ये मामला हो कि जी ये जब ये हो जाएगा, दोनों लोग ये करेंगे तो इस तरह हो जाएगा, because we are a highly stratified unequal society. और उसमें करिकुलम एक करने से आपको वो equity या equality नहीं मिलने वाली. So I think the government simply needs to focus on improving the quality of public schools, and equity will kind of gradually, you know, after all, central model school हमारे हमसे ज़्यादा दूर नहीं है, वहाँ के जो graduates हैं वो कहाँ नहीं पहुँचे. So उर्दू में वो करते रहे, सारा कुछ होता रहा, करिकुलम उनका शायद वो ना हो जो HSN का था. बट माय पॉइंट इज़, आप अगर गवर्नमेंट के अब भी जो डिविजनल या डिस्ट्रिक्ट पब्लिक स्कूल्स हैं उनका मयार बिल्कुल और है. सो जब आप चाहते हैं कि मयार बेहतर हो, अच्छा हो, तो वो हो जाता है. एंड दैट इज़ द वे टू अचीव एक्विटी. नॉट कि हमने करिकुलम ये भी कर दिया, उसको भी उसी तरह बना दिया और एक ही टेक्स्ट बुक सारों के लिए बना दी. दिस इज़ अ वेरी मैकेनिकल अप्रोच. बट वी कैन डिस्कस दिस फर्दर, बट आई थिंक लेट्स जस्ट टेक.
So we have one question here, Nadeem Saab, and then, sorry, I think we only have room for 2-3 questions, right?
जी, मेरा नाम मोहसिन है, and I am working on teaching of science and math in Punjabi, so the mother tongue of the children. अब मसला ये है कि बहुत सारे मसाइल आपने भी बताए, कुछ यहाँ भी लोगों को पता होगा कि इकोनॉमिक मसले हैं, ट्रांजिशन रेट बहुत कम है, बच्चों का सबसे बड़ा मसला ज़बान का है. अब पंजाबी में कोर्स नहीं है, करिकुलम हम डिज़ाइन नहीं करते, तो उसका सलूशन कैसे निकलेगा जबकि हमने उसको शुरू भी नहीं अभी तक किया और ना इस पे हम बात करते हैं. अगर हम मीडियम की बात करते हैं तो या इंग्लिश मीडियम की बात करते हैं या उर्दू मीडियम की बात करते हैं. सिर्फ हम ये ज़रूर कहते हैं, मतलब जितने भी एक्सपर्ट्स हैं जिनको भी पढ़ा है, ज़ुबैदा, तारिक रहमान, कि जी बच्चे की जो इब्तदाई तालीम है वो उसकी अपनी ज़बान में होनी चाहिए, फ़र्स्ट लैंग्वेज में होनी चाहिए, लेकिन हमने इसको अभी तक इनिशिएट भी नहीं किया. सो इसका सलूशन क्या है? मेरा बस यही सवाल है.
देखिए, वेरी ब्रीफली, बिकॉज अगेन वी आर रनिंग आउट ऑफ टाइम. बात ये है कि लोगों के जहनों में एक तो ये बड़ा प्रॉब्लम, यानी एक उनके जो जहन में मसला वो आता है फ़ौरन जब ये इसका सोचते हैं जो बात आप कह रहे हैं. एंड दिस इज़, लेट मी से राइट ऑफ द बैट, दिस इज़ आवर फेलिंग कि हमने उसकी बात शुरू नहीं की. एज विद सो मेनी अदर थिंग्स विच वी हैव नॉट डन दैट वी शुड हैव मेनी ईयर्स अगो, दिस इज़ वन ऑफ देम. सो इसमें तो कोई, बट वाई दे आर्ग्यू दैट, हमारा ये ख्याल है कि एक उनके जहन में ये होता है कि भाई जो ज़बान आपने एक दफ़ा चूज़ कर ली तो इंशाल्लाह आप PhD भी करेंगे सॉलिड स्टेट फिज़िक्स में तो वो फिर आपको पश्तो में करनी पड़ेगी. ये ज़रूरी नहीं है. right? So the point is, you change languages as you go along, change emphasis on which language when. अच्छा, एक तो ये बात है. दूसरा ये है कि वो ये कहते हैं कि देखें जी, बहुत सारी जो चीज़ें हैं उसका वो फिर अब फोटोसिंथेसिस की आप मतलब सराइकी ढूंढेंगे. To be honest, मैं नहीं ढूंढूंगा. I will take the term, use it, and give a footnote कि this is what it means and move on. क्योंकि बात ये है कि अंग्रेजी में भी, उर्दू में भी, look at Urdu. I mean, the point is you borrowed from Arabic, Farsi, Turki, मतलब है कोई any number of other languages. So borrowing is not an issue. तो आप टर्म्स को जब बोरो करते हैं वो तो बिल्कुल ही कोई मसला नहीं है. मसला कॉन्सेप्ट समझाने का है, किसी टर्म को याद रखने का नहीं है. एज आई एम श्योर यू वेल नो, आप तो वो प्रैक्टिस कर रहे हैं जिसकी हम बात, जिसकी एडवोकेसी हम कर रहे हैं. बट आई विल लीव इट देयर फॉर नाउ. थैंक यू.
Thank you. I'm not an education academic. I'm just a mother. My area is public health. But I had a few questions in terms of when we speak of learning in your own primary language, as well as relating it to Pakistan's area or Pakistan's landscape, because it's beautifully complex. We have our urban sector, and then we have the rural areas. We have a very strong presence of private schools in the urban sector, where the situation is quite flipped on the other side, where Urdu is, or local languages are demonized and English is taking precedence. So again, having said that, it's not necessary to change things the way they're going or the direction they want to take it. However, it is important, like Abbas very rightly mentioned, that English is essential if you want to do anything, and then you can't change terminologies, you can't take them to another area. You can just borrow them and use your local language or whatever is closest to the child to explain that term, right? It's important for these approaches and these things to come top down, because culture, wherever, whether it's an organization or a country, it has to come from top down. And with World Bank's presence here, and you have a say with the government. Whatever you say, they would listen, right? To some extent, I mean, I would assume. But it's just that it's important to understand that not to polarize Urdu medium and English medium as much as it is right now. And where we're starting English in grade 5, we bring English as a second language earlier on. Secondly, in an English medium area, we need to introduce more Urdu, right? So, or whatever local language is applicable. Pashto hai, Punjabi hai, Balochi hai. There is some extent of Sindhi that is going on within Sindh, but that's all that we hear of, right? So there needs to be everybody, all need to meet halfway. Where is the work going in that direction? And when we talk about data from places like TIMS and PISA and all of that, my question to Jessica here would be, because I don't know, this is an honest question. Yeah. My question very quickly is that what part of these tests were done in local languages? Because if I go out to buy vegetables, the man will not be able to write a word, but he will be able to do his math in Punjabi, in Saraiki, in whatever local language he's used to. But did these tests only test children in school? Did they test people at large? Did they test them in their own language? Because these math and science could have been around in local languages, but maybe they weren't even tested. Thank you so much.
Yeah, this is always the question with that data. How were they tested? Was it fair? Was it equitable? But I think that misses the greater question. It is an important question, and especially as somebody who works in assessment, how students are assessed matters, right? But the greater question is, we know whether or not these minute points, and I've sat in meetings here where people are arguing over sampling. How do we sample this? How do we sample that? While knowing that 75% of their children are functionally illiterate, right? So I think that the greater question is not where exactly do we start English right? What are the mechanics of this assessment? The greater need for us is to ensure that everybody belongs to our educational system. When we prioritize languages that are not the languages of the home and the people, then they are inevitably left out. They're left out of education, they're left out of belonging and identity within their own country. You are isolating 75% of your country from belonging, from progress, from contributing to the progress of the country. And so when we look at these numbers, it's important to be very critical of them, but it's more important to understand the underlying need there. When we isolate students from their home language, we are telling them they don't belong, and what they understand and what they know and what they bring from home doesn't matter. And I think that that is the greater tragedy that we have underlying all of this. We are losing our youth here. And I know we have to stop, but I want to say one of the reasons that I came to Pakistan, after having been back and forth here many years, is that I believe that people here are extremely intelligent and extremely hardworking and extremely innovative. And it is incredibly distressing to see such a talented populace and a populace with such potential be isolated from their own potential, from their own country, from their own progress. So I believe very much that Pakistan has potential. We have enormous challenges, but I also believe we have a lot of resources in its people.
मेरा ख्याल है जी कि we are missing a four-letter word that educationists don't like to use, which is technology. With technology, I think what I've heard today, there's no change in education at all. We're still running a teacher, we're still worrying about language and everything, whereas studies show that even illiterate people are using Facebook, etc. And technology now allows us to get taught by the best teachers in the world. Why do we need Pakistani teachers? In fact, why do we need schools?
Did anybody learn during COVID? Was anybody in school during COVID? Yeah? Did you learn online? How awful was it? It was awful. It was isolating. It was isolating. It was depressing. We didn't have that human connection. I was a teacher during COVID in schools. Okay, this is before I made my transition. And so yes, technology is key. I did a huge part of my doctorate online as well. Okay, so I believe learning can happen online and it can be very, very good quality. But it can't be our solution. It has to be a tool for improvement. And we have to always consider issues of equity. When we think about people in remote areas who don't have electricity consistently for even the majority of the day, I'm not sure how they're going to be able to access that technology. That technology will continue to benefit the most privileged and widen gaps that already exist until we establish other sort of supports to do that. So technology has enormous potential, but it has to be carefully thought through and carefully planned for to make real improvement.
For myself right now, and think that, we've been talking for about 60 years. Every time a new government comes, there's a new education policy. So basically, we are wasting our intelligence and our time, and we are not thinking of Pakistan. I do agree that technology can be used very well. You can have children coming together to learn. You don't need brick and mortar so much anymore. You can have open spaces for learning. So all these quick on the feet solutions need to be made. Even when you're talking about the mother tongue, you don't need to create curricula in that. You can talk to the child in the mother tongue, but teach from the Urdu books or the English books. If we don't have those resources to keep now, going into curriculum, then again our curriculum, it's so heavy. You don't have to teach a child everything. You just need to teach them how to learn. And essentially, that is the most important thing that is missing in our educational system. We are not encouraging them to learn for themselves.
Your recommendations are the same, like you said, as were presented 10 years ago or 15 years ago. Why can't you think of something new? The issue is that our challenges haven't changed, especially with population growth. We are still grappling with the same issues that a government 20 years, not enough schools, not enough teachers, not enough quality. So while we would like to, go into the next generation of recommendations, we have to address the basic issues first. Our children are not coming to school, and even when they come to school, they're not learning well. Thank you so much.